What would drive a seasoned psychiatric nurse to question everything she thought she knew about the human mind after just one patient encounter? In today's story, you'll meet Dr. Sarah Chen and discover what happened during her night shift at Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital when she encountered a patient who somehow knew details about her life that should have been impossible for him to access. But before we begin, subscribe to the channel to help us reach our next milestone. Leave a like and comment below, telling us what time you're watching this. Now, take a deep breath and stay with us until the end if you're ready for a story that will challenge your understanding of reality itself. There are moments in a person's career when they encounter something so inexplicable that it forces them to reconsider everything they believed about their profession and the nature of human consciousness. I have carried such a moment with me for 7 months now, and only today, as I sit in my new position at Cedar Hills Mental Health Center, 200 miles away from Willowbrook, have I found the courage to share these events. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner with 9 years of experience in acute mental health care. Before that night in February, I had always prided myself on my clinical objectivity, my ability to maintain professional boundaries, and my evidence-based approach to patient care. I had worked with patients experiencing every form of psychiatric crisis imaginable, from acute psychosis to severe dissociative episodes. I thought I understood the complexities of the human mind and the various ways mental illness could manifest. I was completely unprepared for what I was about to encounter. The events I am about to describe took place during my regular night shift in the acute psychiatric unit at Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital, a 70-bed facility located in the mountains of Northern California. I had been working there for 3 years, having transferred from the emergency psychiatry department at University Medical Center to gain more experience in long-term patient care and treatment planning. Willowbrook was known for handling some of the most challenging psychiatric cases in the region. The acute unit where I worked consisted of 24 beds arranged in 2 wings, with a central nursing station that provided clear sight lines to all patient areas. The facility had a reputation for excellence in psychiatric care, but also for attracting patients whose conditions were particularly complex or treatment-resistant. My shift on February 18th began like any other Tuesday night. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. for the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, prepared to receive report from the day shift nurses and begin my rounds with the evening medication pass. The census that night was 21 patients, which was typical for our unit during the winter months. The day shift nurse, Marcus Rodriguez, was a colleague I had worked with many times over the past 3 years. He was thorough and professional, known for his detailed patient assessments and careful documentation. As we walked through the unit during shift change, Marcus gave me report on each patient, highlighting any changes in their condition or treatment plan since my last shift. It was when we reached the last patient on his list that I noticed something unusual in Marcus's demeanor. His voice became more cautious, more measured, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "Room 214 is our newest admission," Marcus said, glancing toward the closed door at the end of the hallway. "Patient was brought in this morning by County Crisis Team. 34-year-old male, no previous psychiatric history according to available records. Found by police wandering downtown, appeared confused and disoriented." "What's his presentation been like today?" I asked. Marcus hesitated for a moment before continuing. "That's the thing, Sarah. His presentation has been completely inconsistent. During intake assessment, he appeared to have significant memory deficits and cognitive impairment. But then this afternoon, he demonstrated knowledge and awareness that seemed far beyond what his initial assessment suggested. Can you be more specific about what you observed?" "Well, during morning rounds, Dr. Patterson asked him basic orientation questions. The patient couldn't tell us his name, the date, or where he was. classic signs of severe cognitive dysfunction. But then, around 3 p.m., I overheard him having a conversation with another patient where he was discussing complex philosophical concepts and demonstrating sophisticated reasoning abilities. That could be explained by fluctuating mental status, I suggested. Many psychiatric conditions can cause intermittent cognitive symptoms. I thought so too, Marcus replied. But there's something else. During his afternoon group therapy session, he made several comments about staff members that were oddly specific and personal, things he couldn't possibly have known from normal patient interactions. What kind of comments? Marcus looked uncomfortable. He mentioned that Dr. Patterson's daughter was starting college next month, and that she was worried about the tuition costs. He told Jennifer, one of our day shift nurses, that her mother's chemotherapy treatments were going well, and that she should stop worrying so much about the side effects. I felt a chill run through me. How could a patient with no previous contact with our facility know such personal details about staff members? Marcus, did anyone discuss these personal matters in front of the patient? That's what we tried to figure out. Dr. Patterson confirmed that she hadn't mentioned her daughter to anyone at work recently. Jennifer was equally puzzled because she had only told her immediate supervisor about her mother's condition, and that conversation took place in a private office with the door closed. Have you documented these observations? I've made notes in his chart, but honestly, Sarah, I wasn't sure how to characterize what I was witnessing. The patient's knowledge seemed impossible to explain through normal means. As we concluded the shift report, Marcus handed me the patient's chart. The name listed was simply John Doe, since the patient had been unable to provide identification when he was found. The intake assessment described a disheveled man in his mid-30s who appeared to be experiencing significant psychiatric distress, but the specific diagnosis remained unclear pending further evaluation. What struck me most about the documentation was the inconsistency Marcus had mentioned. The initial assessment notes described severe cognitive impairment and disorientation, while later entries documented lucid conversations and sophisticated reasoning abilities. It was as if the chart was describing two completely different patients. After Marcus left for the evening, I decided to introduce myself to our new patient before beginning my medication rounds. I approached room 214 and knocked gently on the door frame before entering. The man sitting on the bed looked exactly as the intake notes had described him. Medium height, thin build, dark hair that appeared to need cutting, wearing standard hospital-issued clothing. But what struck me immediately were his eyes. They were a deep brown color, but there was something about his gaze that seemed unusually intense and focused. "Good evening," I said, stepping into the room. "My name is Dr. Chen. I'm the night shift nurse practitioner, and I'll be taking care of you during my shift." He looked up at me with what appeared to be recognition, though we had never met before. "Good evening, Dr. Chen. I've been expecting you." The way he said it gave me pause. Most patients, especially those experiencing psychiatric crises, don't typically expect staff members they haven't met before. "How are you feeling tonight?" I asked, maintaining my professional demeanor while observing his behavior carefully. "I'm feeling much clearer than I was this morning," he replied. "The confusion is lifting and I'm beginning to remember things more clearly. That's good to hear. Can you tell me your name?" He was quiet for a long moment, as if considering how to respond. "I know you're required to ask that question, Dr. Chen, but I think we both know that names are less important than understanding." "Understanding what?" "Understanding why I'm here, and why you're the one who was meant to help me." His response sent an unexpected chill through me. The way he spoke suggested a level of familiarity that was completely inappropriate, given that we had just met. I decided to redirect the conversation back to standard clinical assessment. "I'm here to help all of our patients," I said carefully. "Can you tell me what you remember about how you came to be here?" He tilted his head slightly, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You're wondering if I'm delusional or if there's something else happening here that doesn't fit into your clinical framework." I hadn't said anything to suggest that, but his observation was unnervingly accurate. "What makes you think that's what I'm wondering?" "Because you're a careful clinician, Dr. Chen. You've been working in psychiatric care for 9 years, and you've learned to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right about a patient presentation." My breath caught in my throat. I had not mentioned my years of experience, and this information was not readily available to patients. The intake paperwork wouldn't have included details about my professional background. "How do you know how long I've been working in psychiatric care?" He smiled, but there was something sad about the expression. "The same way I know that you chose this specialty because of your younger brother's struggle with bipolar disorder when you were both teenagers. The same way I know that you still worry about whether you could have done more to help him before he took his own life." The room seemed to spin around me. The information he had just shared was deeply personal, known only to my immediate family and my closest friends. I had never discussed my brother's suicide with anyone at Willowbrook, and certainly not with any patients. "That information is not something you could possibly know," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Chen, please sit down. You look pale." I remained standing, every instinct telling me to leave the room immediately, but my clinical training kept me rooted in place. This was clearly a patient in crisis, and despite my shock, I had a professional obligation to continue the assessment. "I need you to explain to me how you know personal details about my life." What if I told you that explanation isn't as important as the reason I'm sharing this information with you? And what reason would that be? He leaned forward slightly, his intense gaze never leaving my face. "Because you need to understand that consciousness isn't confined to individual brains the way medical science assumes it is. What you're experiencing right now is a glimpse of something much larger." I felt my clinical objectivity beginning to crumble. This patient was either exhibiting symptoms of a psychiatric condition unlike anything I had encountered before, or something was happening that challenged fundamental assumptions about human consciousness and information processing. "Are you telling me you can read minds?" "I'm telling you that the boundaries between individual minds aren't as solid as we believe them to be. Under certain circumstances, information can flow between consciousness in ways that medical science hasn't yet acknowledged." This sounded like classic grandiose delusions, but the accuracy of his personal knowledge about me made it impossible to dismiss his claims outright. "Have you experienced this ability before?" "Not until 3 days ago." "Something changed, Dr. Chen. It started gradually, like tuning into a radio station that was previously filled with static. Suddenly, I could hear thoughts, access memories, understand connections that existed between people." "When did this change begin?" "Saturday night. I was walking home from work, and suddenly I was overwhelmed with information that wasn't coming from my own mind. Voices, images, emotions that belonged to other people. That's why I was found wandering downtown. I couldn't process the flood of consciousness I was suddenly accessing. I found myself drawn into his explanation, despite every rational part of my mind screaming that this was impossible. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a software engineer for a tech company downtown." Or rather, I was. I doubt I'll be returning to that job after this experience. For the first time since entering his room, he had provided information that could be verified through normal channels. If he truly was a software engineer, there would be employment records, identification, and other documentation that could confirm his identity. "Do you remember the name of the company where you worked?" "Meridian Systems. I've been there for 6 years, working on database architecture and information security systems. I made a mental note to follow up on this information during my documentation time later in the shift. You mentioned that you can access other people's thoughts and memories. What else can you tell me about my personal history? I knew I was venturing into territory that violated professional boundaries, but my scientific curiosity had been triggered by the impossible accuracy of his previous statements. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if concentrating or listening to something I couldn't hear. You have a scar on your left shoulder from a bicycle accident when you were 12. You were riding down the hill near your childhood home in Portland, and you hit a patch of gravel that sent you skidding into a fence post. My hand involuntarily moved toward my left shoulder, where indeed I had a scar from exactly the accident he had described. The scar was usually hidden beneath my scrubs, and I had never discussed that childhood incident with anyone at work. You're left-handed, but you learned to write with your right hand because your third-grade teacher told your parents that left-handed children would have difficulty in school. This was also accurate. I was naturally left-handed, but had been forced to switch to writing with my right hand as a child, though I still used my left hand for most other activities. Your favorite patient during your clinical rotations was an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had been admitted for depression following her husband's death. She reminded you of your grandmother, and caring for her helped you decide to specialize in psychiatric nursing. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Mrs. Patterson had indeed been a patient during my student clinical rotations nearly a decade ago, and her impact on my career choice was something I had never shared with my colleagues at Willowbrook. "This is impossible," I whispered. "I understand your shock, Dr. Chen. 3 days ago, I would have said the same thing, but impossibility is just a limitation of our current understanding, not a reflection of what actually exists. How many other people's information can you access? Everyone I come into contact with, and many people I haven't met directly. It's like suddenly having access to a vast network of human consciousness. I can see connections between people, understand relationships and histories that span years or decades. The implications of what he was describing were staggering. If true, it would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, memory, and the nature of individual identity. Are you able to control this ability? Not yet. The information comes in waves, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes just whispers in the background. I'm learning to filter it, to focus on specific individuals or types of information. I realized that I had been standing in his room for nearly 20 minutes, completely absorbed in our conversation and neglecting my other patients. But I couldn't bring myself to leave without understanding more about what I was witnessing. I need to complete my medication rounds, I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to continue this impossible conversation. But I'll be back to check on you later tonight. Dr. Chen, before you go, there's something else you need to know. Something about why I was brought here specifically, to this unit, tonight when you were working. What do you mean? He stood up slowly and walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. The February night was clear, and the lights from the valley below twinkled like stars. This isn't random. My being here, your being assigned to this shift, our conversation tonight. There are patterns in human consciousness that most people can't see, but I can now. Threads that connect people across time and space in ways that seem coincidental but aren't. That sounds like you're describing some kind of predetermined destiny, I said carefully. Many patients with psychiatric conditions develop elaborate belief systems about fate and cosmic connections. I can understand why you would interpret it that way from a clinical perspective. But what if I told you that your brother didn't just struggle with bipolar disorder? What if I told you that in the weeks before his death, he was experiencing something similar to what's happening to me now. My blood ran cold. The mention of my brother felt like a physical blow, and the suggestion that his condition might have been something other than bipolar disorder challenged everything I had believed about his illness and death. "That's not possible," I said, my voice shaking. My brother was thoroughly evaluated by multiple psychiatrists. His diagnosis was clear and well documented. David was hearing voices, but not the kind typically associated with psychotic episodes. He was accessing information about people around him that he couldn't possibly have known through normal means. Your parents thought it was part of his manic episodes, but the voices were actually other people's thoughts and memories. I had never told anyone at Willowbrook my brother's name. The fact that this patient knew David's name sent waves of panic through my system. "How do you know my brother's name?" "The same way I know that 3 weeks before he died, David called you at 2 a.m. and told you he could hear your thoughts. He said he knew you were worried about him, and he could feel your emotions even though you were living in different cities." The memory hit me like a physical force. David had indeed called me at exactly that time, making exactly those claims. I had dismissed his statements as symptoms of his psychiatric condition, but the conversation had haunted me for years afterward. "You told him he was having a manic episode and needed to take his medication." But David wasn't manic, Dr. Chen. He was experiencing the same expansion of consciousness that I'm experiencing now. "This can't be happening," I said, more to myself than to him. "This is some kind of elaborate psychological manipulation." Dr. Chen, look at me. Really look at me. Against my better judgment, I met his eyes directly. What I saw there wasn't the calculating gaze of someone trying to manipulate me, but something that looked like profound sadness mixed with desperate hope. David didn't kill himself because of depression or bipolar disorder. He killed himself because he couldn't handle the overwhelming flood of human consciousness he was suddenly able to access. The pain, the fear, the loneliness of everyone around him became his own pain, and he couldn't find a way to shut it off. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes. The idea that my brother's death might have been caused by something other than mental illness was both terrifying and oddly comforting. "Even if what you're saying is true," I whispered, "how does that help anyone? How does knowing this change anything? Because you're here, Dr. Chen. You chose this profession, this specialty, this specific job, because somewhere deep in your consciousness you knew that someday you would encounter someone like me, someone like your brother. And unlike David, I don't have to face this alone." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. If he was right, if my entire career path had somehow been guided by an unconscious need to understand what had happened to David, then everything I thought I knew about my own motivations and choices was incomplete. What are you asking of me? Help me learn to control this ability instead of being controlled by it. Help me understand what's happening to me so that maybe we can prevent other people from experiencing what David went through. I looked at this man, this patient who had somehow turned my understanding of reality upside down in the span of 30 minutes, and realized that I was facing a choice that would define the rest of my career and possibly my entire life. "I need time to process this," I said finally. "I have other patients to care for tonight, but I promise I'll return before my shift ends." "I'll be here, Dr. Chen, and thank you for listening instead of immediately medicating me into silence." As I left his room, my hands were shaking so badly that I had difficulty closing the door behind me. I walked slowly back to the nursing station, trying to compose myself before interacting with my other patients, but my mind was racing with questions that seemed to have no rational answers. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks performed on autopilot. I administered medications, completed hourly rounds, documented patient observations, and responded to call lights. But my thoughts kept returning to room 214 and the impossible conversation I had just experienced. During my 2 a.m. break, I accessed the hospital's computer system and searched for information about Meridian Systems. The company did indeed exist, located in the downtown business district about 15 minutes from where the patient had been found by police. I made a mental note to contact them in the morning to verify his employment status. I also reviewed David's medical records from his final hospitalization, documents I had requested years earlier but had been too painful to examine thoroughly at the time. Reading through his intake assessment and daily progress notes with fresh eyes, I began to notice patterns I had previously dismissed. Multiple entries described David making accurate statements about other patients and staff members that he couldn't possibly have known through normal interaction. The treating psychiatrist had noted these incidents as evidence of hypervigilance and paranoid ideation. But what if they had been something else entirely? One entry in particular caught my attention. 3 days before David's death, a social worker had documented a conversation where David claimed he could feel the sadness of everyone in the hospital and that he was drowning in other people's emotions. The social worker had interpreted this as metaphorical language describing his own depression, but now I wondered if David had been describing something more literal. At 4 a.m., I returned to room 214. The patient was sitting in the same position by the window, as if he had been waiting for me. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I said, taking a seat in the chair across from his bed. "And I've been reviewing some medical records that seem to support what you told me about my brother. I know this is difficult for you, Dr. Chen. Accepting that everything you believed about David's condition might be incomplete is incredibly painful. What I don't understand is why this is happening. If people can suddenly develop this ability to access other people's consciousness, why isn't it more widely reported? Why aren't there documented cases in medical literature? There are documented cases, but they're misinterpreted and misdiagnosed. How many patients in psychiatric facilities are actually experiencing expanded consciousness rather than traditional mental illness? How many people like David have been medicated into silence before anyone could understand what they were really experiencing?" The implications of his question were staggering. If even a small percentage of psychiatric patients were experiencing something similar to what he described, it would represent a fundamental misunderstanding of human consciousness and mental health treatment. How do we determine which patients might be experiencing this phenomenon versus those with traditional psychiatric conditions? That's exactly the question we need to answer together. But first, I need to show you something that will help you understand the scope of what we're dealing with. You're dealing with. He moved away from the window and sat on the edge of his bed, facing me directly. The intensity in his eyes seemed to increase, and I felt an unusual sensation, as if the air in the room had become charged with electricity. "What do you want to show me?" "Close your eyes, Dr. Chen. I want you to focus on your breathing and try to quiet your analytical mind for just a moment." This request made me uncomfortable. As a healthcare professional, maintaining appropriate boundaries with patients was fundamental to safe practice. But something about his demeanor suggested this wasn't a therapeutic exercise or an attempt at manipulation. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," I said carefully. "I understand your hesitation, but what I'm about to demonstrate will provide evidence that what I'm experiencing is real, not delusional. You need to see this for yourself before you can help me understand it." Against my better judgment, I found myself closing my eyes. The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the hospital's nighttime operations, the hum of ventilation systems, and the occasional footsteps in the corridor outside. "Now what?" I asked, feeling slightly foolish. "Just listen." not with your ears, but with whatever part of your mind processes intuition and instinct. I sat quietly, unsure what I was supposed to be experiencing. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, gradually, I began to notice something unusual. Images started forming in my mind, but they weren't memories from my own experience. I saw a young woman sitting beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of an elderly man who appeared to be sleeping. The woman looked tired, as if she had been keeping vigil for hours. There were flowers on the bedside table, and family photographs scattered across a nearby chair. The image was so vivid and detailed that it felt more like watching a movie than imagining a scene. I could see the pattern on the woman's sweater, the way the afternoon light filtered through Venetian blinds, even the title of a book she had placed on the windowsill. "Open your eyes, Dr. Chen." I opened my eyes to find him watching me intently. "What did you see?" I described the scene I had witnessed, including details about the woman's appearance, the hospital room setting, and the various objects I had observed. "That's Jennifer's mother," he said quietly. Jennifer, the day shift nurse who Marcus mentioned earlier. Right now, at this very moment, she's sitting in the oncology unit at Regional Medical Center, staying overnight with her mother who's receiving her final round of chemotherapy. "How is that possible?" I whispered. "The same way you were able to access that information just now. Consciousness isn't confined to individual brains, Dr. Chen. Under certain circumstances, we can tap into a shared field of awareness that contains information about people and events across space and time. But I'm not experiencing what you described. I don't have access to other people's thoughts or memories. You do, but only when someone like me creates a bridge. Think of it like a radio transmission. Most people don't have receivers capable of picking up the signal, but when I focus my attention, I can temporarily tune you into the same frequency I'm accessing." This explanation challenged everything I understood about neuroscience and consciousness. The idea that human awareness could somehow exist outside individual brains contradicted fundamental assumptions about how the mind worked. If this is real, why hasn't medical science discovered it before? Because medical science approaches consciousness from a materialist perspective, assuming that awareness is generated entirely by neural activity within individual brains. But what if consciousness is more like a field that individual brains access rather than create? He stood up and began pacing slowly around the small room, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. "Think about it this way, Dr. Chen. Radio waves exist everywhere around us, but we can only detect them when we have the proper equipment tuned to the right frequency. What if human consciousness works similarly? What if there's a field of awareness that surrounds us constantly, but most people's brains aren't configured to access it directly? That would explain why some people might suddenly develop this ability while others never experience it at all." Exactly. And it would explain why people like your brother became overwhelmed when their brains suddenly began receiving signals they weren't prepared to process. I thought about David's final weeks, remembering conversations where he had seemed confused and frightened by experiences he couldn't adequately describe. At the time, I had attributed his distress to the progression of his psychiatric condition, but now I wondered if he had been struggling to cope with an expanded awareness he didn't understand. You said that what happened to David started 3 weeks before his death. How long has your experience been going on? 5 days now. It started gradually, like I mentioned, but it's been intensifying each day. This morning, I could barely function because of the overwhelming amount of information flowing through my consciousness. What kind of information? Everything. The thoughts and feelings of everyone in this hospital. The personal histories of staff members. The fears and hopes of other patients. The complex web of relationships that connects every person in this building. He stopped pacing and looked directly at me. I left Willowbrook that morning with more questions than answers. My understanding of human consciousness forever changed by one impossible patient. 6 months later, I learned that John Doe had been quietly transferred to a specialized research facility. His identity confirmed as Michael Torres, the software engineer he claimed to be. The research into expanded consciousness phenomena continues, but the questions remain. How many patients in psychiatric facilities are experiencing something beyond traditional mental illness? How many people like David have been lost because we didn't understand what they were truly experiencing? These are the questions that haunt me now, and perhaps they should haunt all of us who work in mental health care.